Before we begin, in honor of all of our shuhada, all of our ulama who have given everything to preserve this religion for us, all of the marhumeen of those of us here present, and all of the marhumeen who do not have anyone to make dua for them, rahimallahu man qara'a surat al-Fatiha. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا وشفيع ذنوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين واللعنة الله على أعدائهم من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين وصلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا لثارات الحسين يا حجة الله يا ابن الحسن يا صاحب العصر والزمان اللهم صل على محمد. My dearest elders, brothers, salamun alaykum wa rahmatullah. When you study business studies at GCSE, you get introduced to a concept called the USP, the unique selling point. And any business in the entire world must find its USP because that is what separates itself from its competitors. Otherwise, you're just an average business. Netflix knows that their USP is the breadth of their content, the speed at which you can find that content, and the recommendations it keeps you to keep you hooked to that content. And that is what differentiated Netflix from back in the day Blockbuster in Northwood High Street, from Love Film, which came briefly and then died. So any business that you then go and inherit or purchase or look to purchase, it is necessary that you understand its USP. I know many of you guys have had very successful careers in the city, and I'm sure you've either been a part of, led, seen a merger or an acquisition. The leader of the business looks at a company and he doesn't just suddenly say, I fancy it. He pays thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, if not millions, to average consultants, if I could add, who go and do a load of due diligence, right? And as part of that due diligence, they try and find what is the USP of this business? What is it that makes it different? How is it that it can add to your business that grows your revenue, grows your capability, grows your capacity? And with this very same logic, we need to apply it to ourselves. What is my USP? What due diligence have I done on my USP? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes it clear in the Quran that He doesn't create just for fun. He creates with purpose, with intent. You could argue with absolute due diligence. And you would be deemed foolish if you approached a business, didn't identify its USP, yet still transacted on it, right? Yet we've been gifted a life for 10, 20, 50, 80 years. And if you were to ask every individual on the face of the planet, what is your USP? How many people would say the same answer? In fact, I posed a question. What is the actual answer of man's USP? What is it that differentiates man from any other creation in the world? Because if we don't know what that USP is, we won't be able to understand it. And if we don't understand it, we can't utilize it. And if we can't utilize it, then as Surah Al-Mulk says, we're just here to see which of you are best in your deeds. We have no idea what good deeds look like. We have no idea what the outcome looks like. So today, inshallah, with your permission, we want to figure out what is this USP of man. Not from our words, but by combining the Quran and of course the Ahl al-Bayt of our Imam alayhim as-salam. And if we have your permission, we'll proceed with the salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So what differentiates man from an ant, from a spider, from grass, to trees, to rain, to rainforests? What differentiates man from the water out of the tap, to the puddles after it rains, to the floods, to the oceans? What differentiates man from this piece of earth, to the mountains, to the entire earth, to the planets, to all of the entire creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? What is the USP of man? Or is man lesser than the universe? Or is man lesser than the mountain? It's a question that we ask. And we know the answer is very simple. I hope. It's the intellect. That is the single thing that differentiates us, our aql. Because the mountain crushes man for fun. Even when the mountain doesn't move and man tries to go above the mountain, Everest kills man. So clearly it's not strength. Man is able to swim in the swimming pool for a few minutes, but can't last in an ocean for a few minutes. So clearly it's not the strength that we have either when it compared to the water. It's simply our intellect, our aql that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us. Now, that's not news for any of you guys, I'm sure. But what may be news is the following, which is that when you take two different individuals and they're faced with a given circumstance, and you interview both of those individuals after their act, both would probably say, yeah, I thought about what I did and I enacted. They would both argue, I used my intellect. So what differentiates our understanding of the intellect versus their understanding of the intellect? Because frankly, from afar, it has become very clear that individuals, families, societies, dare I say our communities, are misunderstanding what Allah has told us about what this intellect is for. We're justifying actions that we'd otherwise rebuke people for doing. Let me give you an example. If there were two men, both who had families and both who had no money, and you're watching situation A and situation B, they're independent of one another, and you're watching it as an observer. Both of them find money on the floor. Neither of them have money. They find money on the floor. They both have families to feed. Person A takes this money, thinks, engages his intellect, perhaps, sees that this money is now in his hand, goes home, pays for some food, feeds his family. You interview him after the fact. He says, look, I don't have money. I found money. I have a family that's hungry. I fed them. I use my intellect. To the average person in the world, they'll say, this is a man who's very wise. He used his intellect. Person B, however, sees the money, picks it up, stops for a moment, looks at this money. His intellect engages, and he thinks, who is the rightful owner of this money? I don't know what to do with this money. So he calls Sheikh X, someone who is a specialist in fiqh, not someone who studied fiqh for a year, not 10 years, rather someone who studied fiqh for the best part of 80 years of their life. Perhaps those are the people we can refer ourselves to when it comes to the Sharia of Allah. And he finds, there is a specific ruling in the eyes of Allah, in His Sharia, that if you find money that does not belong to you, there is a certain due process you now need to go through. And this person goes through that process. Person B, according to some individuals, to say, what a daft guy. What on earth has he done? His family's still hungry and he had money in his hand. What's he playing at? Crazy guy. Consumerism would say that. Capitalism would say that. But we have a slightly different understanding when we evaluate these two positions. Who was right? Who was wrong? Now we can jump to that conclusion, who is right, who is wrong, but let's build up to it. The answer as to who is right out of person A, who fed his family, and person B, who followed the Sharia, it depends on what you think the intellect is for. And to know what you think the intellect is for, it depends on who you consult. Because if you consult the capitalist, he'll say person A. If you consult the jurist, he'll say person B. So where does man get his answer from as to what is the purpose of the intellect that drives our effort, that makes us realize and actualize our USP? Because we said, if Netflix did not use its leverage, its USP, its ability to keep you hooked on programs, you'd be useless. In the very same way, if man does not use its intellect in the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us to use it, man is frankly Foolish. And if it's made sense so far, can you offer salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad? So what is the use of the intellect according to Allah? And I'm just going to take a moment out here and just say this. Some people nowadays, within our community, whether we like it or not, will say, Sadiq, come on, man, you're getting a bit too excited. You don't need to think so much in life. Just go with it. Enjoy yourself. Relax. Feed your family. It's not a big deal. You'll say to them, but I've got this intellect and I think it has a purpose. No, relax. You don't need to think so much. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses such people in the Quran. Such people who, when Allah has given them something, i.e. everything that we see or touch or feel or sense, and you don't think about it, or you don't feel it has a purpose, He has a damning statement towards them. What does He say? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا خَلَقْنَا السَّمَاءَ وَالْأَرْضَ وَمَا بَيْنَهُمَا بَاطِلًا. We didn't create these skies, these heavens and the earth, and everything that's between them, batilan, aimlessly, without reason, without understanding, without conviction as to why we've made it. In fact, Allah goes further. He now addresses those who thinks that all this creation is just done aimlessly. He says, ذَلِكَ ذَنُّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا. They are those who disbelieve. They are those amongst the kuffar. So, we need to really check this out. What is this USP for? And to answer this, we go to one of the best creations Allah has ever created. We go to a narration from a man who split knowledge across all of the lands. And interestingly, this narration is found in one of our most key hadith corpuses, Usul al-Kafi. The first book of al-Kafi. Can anyone tell me what it's called? Anyone? 40 men, 50 men who have sat with how many hours of majalis? If I ask you what is the first surah of the Quran, you would tell me? Fatiha. Rasulullah said, Thaqalain, Quran and the Ahlul Bayt. How do we learn about the Ahlul Bayt? Through the hadith. What is our most key book? Usul al-Kafi. Around 16,000 narrations Shaykh al-Kulaini compiles. Imagine how many he started with, and he whittles them down into detail. He then compiles them in, I would assume, a certain order. If you've spent 20 odd years of your life and you're now going to present your work, there's probably going to be some logic by which you build it up. The first book of Usul al-Kafi is not about Tawheed explicitly. Not even the second book is about Tawheed. That's the third book. Kitab al-Tawheed is book 3. The second book is knowledge and its merits. But to know Tawheed, you need to have knowledge. To know knowledge, you need to engage your intellect. The first book of Al-Kafi is Kitab al-Aql wal-Jahl. The book of intellect and foolishness. I.e., the man who does not use his intellect is a man who is foolish. It's a man who doesn't leverage the business for its USP. It's the man who doesn't use his USP that Allah created for him for. So the very first narration, if there's anything you take away from today's discussion, it's to know the first narration that Shaykh al-Kulaini presents out of 16,000 narrations. Oh, Shaykh al-Kulaini, what did you put together? What was so interesting in your findings that you thought, I'm going to kick off with this? He kicks off with a narration from none other than Imam al-Baqir, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. Allahumma salli ala. He says that from his understanding, from his analysis, from his effort in putting these narrations together, that Imam al-Baqir is reported to have said, لَمَّا خَلَقَ اللَّهُ الْعَقْلِ اسْتَنْطَقَ. When Allah created the intellect, He made it speak. We've got the answer. Whatever comes next is the answer. Allah has made the intellect speak. This is the USP. What does the intellect say? ثُمَّ قَالَ لَهُ. Then Allah says to this intellect, أَقْبِلْ فَأَقْبِلْ. Allah orders it and says, come forward. So what does the intellect do? It goes forward. ثُمَّ قَالَ لَهُ. Then Allah says to the intellect, أَدْبِرْ. Come back. فَأَدْبَرْ. Then it went back. Okay. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I swear by my honor and my glory that I have not created any creation more beloved to me than you. What? What about the Prophet? We're getting there. Allah orders this intellect, go forward, it goes forward. It says come back, it comes back. Allah now says, I've not created more beloved to me than you, O intellect. He continues, وَلَا أَكْمَلْتُكَ إِلَّا فِي مَنْ أُحِبْ. And I will not perfect this intellect in anyone except those whom I love. Subhanallah. What is it that made the Prophet the Prophet? His intellect. What is it that made Ja'far as-Sadiq Ja'far as-Sadiq? His intellect. And what is it that makes Al-Qa'im min Ali Muhammad Al-Qa'im min Ali Muhammad? Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Super clear. Go forward, it goes forward. Come back, it comes back. I don't love anything more than I love you. I'm going to perfect you in the thing that I love the most. But then Allah continues just to clarify. At the end of this narration from Imam al-Baqir, he says, I will command you to obey me. And I will prohibit you from disobeying me. And I will punish you for disobeying me. And I will reward you for obeying me. Simple. End of hadith. Simple. What is the purpose of the intellect? Obey Allah. Obey Allah. Obey Allah. That is all that it boils down to. The intellect, if you take it from a theoretical concept, without all of the shahawats, without all of the desires, this very intellect that is placed between you, me, and you, if we didn't have our desires beating it, fundamentally, what would happen? We'd simply obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We'd simply stay away from muharramat. Simple. That is the pure intellect that Allah placed within us. But when it was placed within man, suddenly, I started to do a bit of an internal dance with it. My feeling beat it. My lust beat it. My anger beat it. My jealousy beat it. And now you see the dynamic of man. It's perfected within Rasulullah, which is why anything that he did was nothing. Illa wahyun yuha. It was nothing but revelation. Because it was just intellect obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in absolute certainty, in absolute reality. So the theory is simple. You've got an intellect. This is your USP. The USP is designed to obey Allah. So just obey Allah. It's simple. Just imagine a world for a moment where everyone obeyed Allah. Would we see Palestine and Israel right now? No. Would we see Karbala? No. Would we see divorces? No. Would we see jealousy? No. Would we see corruption? No. Allah gave us the means. We're the ones that messed it up. We had the opportunity. We still have the opportunity because He is Ghafurur Rahim. He'll take you back. He'll let you journey back. There's no issues. So what is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then commanding us to do? In that hadith, to give us the example, He said, I tell you to go forward, go forward. I tell you to come back, come back. Okay, Allah, what are you telling me to do now? If I tap into this intellect and I'm ready, whatever you tell me, I'm going to do. What do you tell me to do? وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسِ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. I didn't create man or jinn except إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. Except that you are in the constant state of ubudiyya. يَعْبُدُونَ فِعْلْ مُضَارِع, present tense. It connotes movement. It's a verb. A verb needs time. A verb needs action. It's not theoretical. It's not sitting in the hawza and studying full stop. It's sitting in the hawza, studying and enacting. It requires movement. It requires action. We can go into the discussion about what ubudiyya looks like. Briefly, as you know, it's not just salah, it's everything else that you do. An example would be what? You can go and look after your parents. Someone would say this is ubudiyya. Is it? It depends how you're looking after your parents. If you're feeding them pork, is that ubudiyya or not? Allah commanded you to do what? Obey and avoid. Now we start to realize, decisions are actually quite difficult. And decisions can be made much more simpler if I just go, what did Allah command me to do? What did He forbid me from doing? Very simple concepts. But we've fallen. Truly speaking, if we were to assess, and I'm going to say something a bit outlandish, if you were to assess our local community, our Khoja community in London, would our spiritual barometer say we're spiritually progressing or regressing? We may have different understandings as to what that looks like, right? But I'm just putting the question in your head. Some of us, inshallah, have spiritually progressed, but as a community, as a society, as families, have we spiritually progressed or regressed? Do we have spiritual guidance that we're enacting upon? Or are we feeling a bit stuck? And what is the cause of feeling stuck? What is the cause of feeling frustrated? What is the cause of, and I'm going to use the D word, because Allah uses the equivalent of it in Arabic in the Quran, depressed? Is the community finding more cases of frustration and anger and loneliness and depression? What is the root behind this? Because Allah commands us to worship. Illa liya'budun. Then what does He say about this worship? That this worship brings tranquility of the heart. الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَتَطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبَ بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ أَلَا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ تَطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبِ. If you worship, if you use your intellect for the command that I gave you, you're going to find tranquility. In my remembrance, Allah says, in my remembrance, you're going to find tranquility. But, He gives you the opposite of the situation as well. If you remember me, if you obey me, if you worship me, tranquility. But then He also warns us, وَمَنْ أَعْرَضَ مَنْ ذِكْرِ فَإِنَّ لَهُ مَعِيشَةً ضَنْكَ. If you are an individual that turns away from my remembrance, indeed, the translation, this isn't my words, so obviously the translation have many variations of this. Indeed, he will have a depressed life. He's going to feel loneliness. We've all been there, right? You buy the nicest new house, the nicest new jacket. You marry the best person in the community. You can all debate whether you did that or not. You do the thing, you land the job, but it feels devoid. But that very same car can feel so godly the next day when you're shepherding 20 people to the Azaa of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. The same vehicle has a whole different meaning behind it. The same house that was so lonely without children, now here's the Masa'ib of Hussein recited by your children. Does that not fill you with something more? When the aql engages and it worships Allah and it obeys Allah, it finds tranquility and happiness. When it turns away and moves away, it finds loneliness. It finds depression. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. There's a whole extra part to this discussion which we won't have time for, and I want to make sure we spend some time, inshallah, on the Masa'ib of Imam Sajjad, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. So I'll just conclude this part with the following. From the conversations, and this is now subjective, from the conversations that I am fortunate to have with members of the community, be they old or young, be they men or women, be they in London or in the Far East or wherever, personally, and ulama who I get to speak with and spend time with, they're all saying a very consistent thing. And that is that the community is a bit lost at the moment. The Shia community as a whole is a bit lost at the moment. We're not engaging our intellect. We're not training it. We're not leveraging our USP. In some cases, we don't even know what our USP is. And even worse, when Allah said in that hadith, obey and I'll reward you, disobey and I'll punish you, we've made disobedience okay. True or not? We've made disobedience absolutely okay. I won't need to give examples, I'm sure you have examples in your head, but we've made disobedience fine. In fact, we've got to a situation where discussing obedience of Allah in practical terms, in dress code or in places you visit or food that you eat or the way you spend your money towards khums or not khums, we've made the discussion of obedience to Allah a taboo on our dinner tables. In our own masjid, it's become a taboo. Is this not a sign of individuals who don't know their USP and aren't leveraging it for the reason Imam al-Baqir told us that it was leveraged for? That Allah made that intellect speak? Go forward, I'll come forward. Go back, I'll come back. Obey, I'll obey. No, in today's day and age, no, I need to decide if I'm going to obey or not. I need to see if obedience fits well with me or not. So what is it that's got into us that is stopping us from obeying? That is stopping us from worshipping? This is an introduction, if you like, to the science of ethics. And the scholars of ethics conclude, generally speaking, with two main factors that cause an individual to no longer obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The first of those is ignorance of Allah. Becoming jahil of Allah. not knowing, not caring, not even looking into what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. And the second of the factors is ignorance of our own selves. When we don't know Allah and we don't know ourselves, we're not going to worship because we don't know our USP. And even worse, we don't even know who created our USP. And even worse, when we feel that loneliness and that worry, we turn to individuals' books where they don't even know what their USP is and they don't even know the creator of that USP. We find comfort in atheist authors rather than the Ahlul Bayt alayhim wassalam. What has happened to us? Subhanallah, what has happened to us? And who makes it abundantly clear? Our respective fourth Imam. Sahif al-Sajjadiyya compiled into a few different parts. One of them is Risalatul Huquq. Can someone give me an example of one of the Risalas that the Imam discussed in Risalatul Huquq? The rights of the parents. Ahsantum. Parents always comes first. Wife usually later. Rights of the children. Rights of the hand. Who can tell me what the first rights that Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam brings up in Risalatul Huquq? The rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The rights of the parents is nothing without the rights of Allah. The first right is the right of Allah. The second right is the right of the self. What does Imam Sajjad tell us very clearly in the first right, the right of Allah? فَأَمَّا حَقُّ اللَّهِ الْأَكْبَرُ, the greatest, al-akbar, the greatest rights of Allah, فَإِنَّكَ تَعْبُدُهُ, is that you go and worship Him. Anything else that comes after now, if it contradicts that line of worship, is nothing, is useless, is dunyawi, is something that will make you into a situation of ma'ishatan dhanka, a depressed life. You go worship or look after your parents to such an end without Allah in sight, you won't find that real nearness to Allah within it. And in the second Risala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala about the self, when He talks about the right of me, the right of you on yourself, how does Imam Sajjad discuss it? وَأَمَّا حَقُّ نَفْسِكَ عَلَيْكَ, and the right upon yourself, فَأَن تَسْتَوْفِيَهَا فِي طَاعَةِ اللَّهِ, is that you employ it completely in the ubudiyyah, the servitude of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To use your USP, your intellect, is to worship, to obey. And to worship and obey is to go and understand what is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and what is me, what am I, who am I. If you figure these two things out, which you never can, it's an infinite journey towards Allah, you'll be flying. And this is what Imam Sajjad alayhi salam made abundantly clear to us. Hatta even in Karbala, when Imam Hussein alayhi salam has now seen his companions go and he's seen his family members go, the Maqatil tell us, and there's differing discussions on when this exactly happens. Some say it's a repeated case of moments, that Imam Hussein alayhi salam calls out that call, Hal min Nasirin yansurna, is there anyone to help us? This is the Imam, the Hujjah of Allah on earth, asking mankind, is there anyone left to defend the honor of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam? Imam Sajjad hears a call, not just any call. This is a call with lisan Allah, with the tongue of Allah. What is required of the intellect? Obedience. What does Imam Sajjad do? He hears this call, he rises, and he starts to walk towards Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. He in himself, even in Karbala, is making this very clear for us. We know that he was very ill at the time, to the extent he was even unable to hold a sword. But no excuses. Illness or not, you obey the word of your Imam. Why? Ati Allah wa ati ar-Rasul wa ulil amri minkum. Obey Allah, obey the Messenger and those in authority from among you. Who was in authority at that time? Imam Sajjad was in Karbala. His Imam, who happened to be his father, Imam Hussein alayhi salam. So he obeys. You make a call, I'm coming. Because that is the call of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But then Imam Hussein tells him and calls to Kulthum, dear aunt, take him back. And so Imam Sajjad listens to the call of his Imam. No ifs, no buts. The learning continues. I'd just like you to consider this, and it's something that I think we overlook, which is the actual journey that Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam take after Karbala. From Medina back to Medina. What does it look like? The minimum distance, according to historians, is that it was a 4,100 kilometer journey. 4,100 kilometer journey. To put into context, that's 3.5 times going from the southern tip of Brighton to the most northern tip of Scotland. You've all had children, you've all seen children. I see it with my son. You take him to the supermarket and he's walking for more than 8 minutes and he wants you to carry him, right? Their legs can't hack it. They're not built for that. Our legs aren't built for that. 90 kilometers, Najaf to Karbala. We need how many mawakib to look after us to make it? Even at that, we give up halfway. I'm talking children. History's talking children. Not just any children, but I ask you this. We've all buried a loved one within this cemetery, right? The grief that you feel after someone has passed away is physically tiring. Yani you've not actually done anything physical. The most you've done is maybe carry the coffin with 20 other people helping you. But you have physical exhaustion in your body. And your friends, your family, your community, what do? Come home, let me make you food, let me look after you. I'll walk home, no chance, I'm dropping you, I'm going to make sure you're in your bed safely. But the state of Sukaina is such that she doesn't get to bid farewell to Hussein. She doesn't get to grieve for Hussein alayhi salam. She doesn't get that opportunity. No. Instead, she's taken 3.5 times the length of the UK by foot or on saddleless donkeys. What state of grief that she's in. And let me just read this to you from Imam Sadiq, where he narrates from his father, Imam al-Baqir, who said that he asked his father, Imam Sajjad, how were you taken to Yazid? Imam Sajjad reported to reply saying, I was taken on a lame and saddleless camel. He says, the Ra's of Hussein was raised on a spear, and our women were behind us on bare-backed mules. The guards were behind us and to our sides they would carry spears. Imam Sajjad, according to history, says if any one of us would weep, they would hit our heads with those spears. And it is in this manner that we arrive in a Sham, where a man announces, O people of Sham, here are the prisoners from an accursed household. Ziyarat Nahiyah says, ala qana ra'suk. Your head was raised on a spear. وَسُبِيَ أَهْلُكَ كَالْعَبِيدِ. That your family were taken like slaves. It says, أَيْدِيهِمْ مَغْلُولَةٌ إِلَى الْعَنَاقِ. That their hands were shackled to their necks. يُطَافُ بِهِمْ فِي الْأَسْوَاقِ. And they're paraded through these towns. In another narration that Shaykh al-Saduq mentions, it says that Imam Sajjad reported to say the women were taken and were not protected from the heat or the cold, and this caused their skin to peel off from their faces. My dear brothers and sisters, every single page after Karbala is a masa'ib for Imam Sajjad alayhi salam. So I end you with the following 2 things. And that is that when you have to recount the death of your family member to another family member on the phone call, when you've had to call Canada or Dar es Salaam and say that my father or my mother or my child or my friend has just passed away, is it not the case that your throat begins to choke and you can't even complete that sentence? Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, he approaches the city of Medina. Medina's home. Oh Sajjad, you now are able to go home. He stops at the edge of Medina. He orders his family members, set up camp here. He calls out to an individual by the name of Bishr or Bashir. He's a poet in the land. He summons Bishr to him. And he tells him, Bishr, are you a poet? He says, yes, I'm a poet. And he tells Bishr, go and tell the people of Medina what has happened to Al Muhammad in Karbala. Bishr rides his saddle. Where does he go? History makes a point of this. Where does Bishr go to announce this? Bishr goes to Masjid al-Nabawi. Oh Zahra, I ask you, do you hear the call of Bishr from Masjid al-Nabawi? Oh Rasulullah, Hussein bid farewell to you from Masjid al-Nabawi. You told him you will not attain the station illa bishahada, except that you attain the shahada. Oh Rasulullah, you played with Hussein within Masjid al-Nabawi, did you not? You let him climb on your back within this area, did you not? Oh Rasulullah, how do you hear the news of Bishr? Where he says, Ya Ahl Yathrib, La muqam lakum bihaya. Oh people of Yathrib, there is no place for you in this city anymore. Why? He says, قتل الحسين فأدمعي مدرار. He says, this is Hussein has been killed. So shed endless tears in sorrow. He continues, he says, الجسم منه بكربلاء مضرج. He says, this body of Hussein lies in Karbala covered in blood and dust. ورأس منه على القناة يدار. With his head on a lance being paraded about. A man comes to Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, according to Shaykh al-Tusi. He asks Imam Sajjad, Awali ibn al-Hussein, who was victorious? Look at this aqli reply from Imam Sajjad. Beautiful. Just to remind us, what is the mission of Hussein ibn Ali in this? The man comes to Imam Sajjad, O Ali ibn al-Sajjad, O Ali ibn al-Hussein al-Sajjad, who was victorious? The Imam is sitting on a camel with a hood covering his head. He replies, إِذَا أَرَدْتَ أَن تَعْلَمْ مَنْ غَلَبْ. If you want to know who was successful, what does the Imam say? دَخَلَ وَقْتُ الصَّلَاةِ. When the time of salah comes, فَأَذِّن ثُمَّ أَقِمْ. Then recite the adhan and recite the iqamah. I ask you, Imam Sajjad, why? Perhaps it's because we still say, أَشْهَدُ أَنَّ مُحَمَّدًا رَسُولُ اللَّهِ. But why is the face of Muhammad, why is the one that looked like Muhammad on a spear taken from Karbala through to Sham? على لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون والله والعاقبة للمتقين إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. ماتم حسين. يا حسين يا حسين يا حسين يا حسين.